Hello, BookTube. As you know, BookTube is crazy about events. We love our events here on BookTube. People make readathons and read-alongs and whatnots every week of every month of every year. And they start to pile up to the point where if you wanted to, you could organize your entire month's reading, doing nothing but going from one BookTube event to another. In fact, they can be hard to keep track of. Now, I'm going to leave a link. Leslie at the Nerdy Narrative does try her best to keep track of them. And she has a list of BookTube events for the month of May, which starts today. I myself am hosting such an event. I am one of the co-hosts of Horror Mayhem that was created by the Bookish Bryants and that deals with horror fiction for the whole month of May. But there are a bunch of other BookTube events. If you go to Leslie's video, you can pretty much pick a la carte depending on what you're interested in. And I wanted to highlight a few of those that really intrigued me for one reason or another. And the first one that I want to do for this video, I'm going to do sort of address videos for these events one at a time rather than lump them all into one video. And the one that I want to deal with first is one that has been around for a while. I've actually been a co-host in previous years. It's Maybe Midrash, which was created by Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse, and which he's putting on this year, doing the hosting duty solo. And Maybe Midrash, as you might be able to guess from the name, is all about a serious, sensitive, non-provocative discussion of religion, all religions, any religion, the serious thinking about religion, whether you are faithful or not. It's a tremendously valuable thing. I'll leave it to Jason to think of it. It's a tremendously valuable thing to be able to address both compassionately and critically. And it's also, of course, the subject of an unbelievable mountain of literature, just a mountain of literature. So you have a million things to choose from. You can read in your own religious tradition, or you can read in a religious tradition about which you know nothing. And I have the prompts down here. There are only a few challenges. Really, all of these things are very, very loose. These things are just the challenges in any one of these May events is just to give you a little superstructure if you want it. Your participation is gratefully accepted if you're just in the spirit of the thing. No pun intended for Maybe Midrash. And for Maybe Midrash, there are 3 main challenges with one extra that I just love, absolutely love. The first challenge is to read a work of fiction that addresses religion seriously, that addresses it in some way some way seriously. And in this, Jason makes the point of saying that he is largely dismissing the gigantic, burgeoning Christian literature industry as being shallow and usually self-congratulatory. And I have to agree with him. I know that industry extremely well. I review one of those books pretty much every day. And I couldn't disagree with that characterization. You would hunt for a long time before you found the gems in amongst all the garbage. So I will agree with that and stay away from it. The work of fiction, I have the notes on an iPad, but I also have props, so pictures, so you can see what I'm talking about. For fiction, I'm going to reread The Last Temptation of Christ by Nikos Kazantzakis, who has been on my mind for years since I became friends with Mark Richardson of Richardson Reads, of the BookTube channel Richardson Reads. Not only friends, but also house guests with the Bean many, many times, many, many late night book conversations. He likes Kazantzakis, the author, a lot more than I do. And when it comes to another, experienced, thoroughly knowledgeable, bookish person, that's not a case where you dig in your heels. If you hear that from someone who knows what they're talking about, your first response shouldn't be to dig in your heels and say, I never really liked him all that much. You should be, maybe I didn't get him. If you like him this much, maybe I should pay more attention. So I've been thinking about revisiting a lot of his work, at least the major things. I read The Last Temptation of Christ once, years and years and years ago, right before the movie. And I thought it was stiff and a little bit, ironically enough, preachy. And it might still be that. It might still be that. It might still come down to a matter of personal preference. Mark would be the first person to honor that if it happened. He wasn't at all involved in this decision. It's just when you know somebody, another thoroughgoing reader, another passionate reader, who likes author X or genre Y that has been kind of lukewarm with you, it's, for me anyway, a huge amount of fun to revisit that and see if maybe that's the nudge you needed. So I will go back to Kazantzakis and see what there is to be seen, see whether or not his book is really good. Then the next prompt is to read a work of nonfiction that deals with seriously with religion. And I have one. It's a biggie. It's a chunkster, but they don't really intimidate me. And it's a book that from a few years ago. I should already have read this book. It's by Mike Licona, and it's called The Resurrection of Jesus. The little print there is a new historiographical approach. It's a great big book that looks at, as you can tell from the subtitle, that looks at basically the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I knew about this book years ago. Mike Licona is a very fixture on the God-bothering debate circuit. So he is all over YouTube. You can find him easily on YouTube. And he seems like a nice guy and also knowledgeable. It's just... I think the reason why I hesitated to go at this book is because its task, as adumbrated in its subtitle, is completely impossible. Right? It's absolutely, completely impossible to write even a small book. This thing is like 800 or 900 pages long. It's impossible to write even a small book, even a small pamphlet, on the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ, because there isn't any. Not a single scrap of it. There couldn't really be, short of videotape. There's no way to say this is a historiographical approach. I am steeped in Old Testament and New Testament literature, and I am going to study this subject to see what people were saying about it and where the traditions came from. Okay, fine. And I imagine I'm going to get a lot of that in this book, which is great because that's what I want. The only hesitation I have is that I know Mike Licona's goal is in doing all of that. His goal is not to find out what is out there, sift through it, and then draw conclusions based on what he finds. He has a goal in mind. He has a point that he wants to enlist evidence towards, and the point is unprovable. So there are going to be parts of this that are just going to be exhortation, which if he's eloquent, I won't so much mind that. I read everything that N.T. Wright writes, for instance, and a lot of what he writes is exhortation. That is probably what stopped me from reading this the first time, is that if there were historiographical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ, there wouldn't be any other religions. And also, I would have seen it. Right? Everyone would. It would be the single most remarkable thing ever to happen, as far as we know, anywhere in the universe. Anyone with a brain in their head would want to see that evidence. It's not that anyone is willfully seeing it and ignoring its significance. It just isn't there. Not even the Gospels agree on this, and that they are our only source for any of this. But nevertheless, this is still a shameful oversight. This guy is a serious scholar. I should have paid attention to this a long time ago. So I'm going to be tackling it for the nonfiction element of maybe Midrash and see what he has to say. See what kind of lines he draws between the dots of the meager historical stuff that we have. Could be that he's a really fascinating thinker. For nonfiction, I'm also going to read something else. I don't know that I have a picture of it to show you. No, I don't think I do. But one of the things that is not a challenge for maybe Midrash is to actually read an actual text of a scripture of some kind, to read some religious scripture. That is not part of the challenge of maybe Midrash, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'll never pass up an opportunity to reread what is, I now realize, in the last few years I've come to realize, my favorite religious text of them all is the Gospel of St. Luke and Acts. The Luke-Acts corpus of writing, all by very much the same author. I love it to distraction. I will read that again in great granular detail for maybe Midrash. But there's also a book, I don't have a picture of it, but it's the Gospel of Luke. It's an analysis by someone named Ed Gallagher. And once again, Ed Gallagher has a point to make. Once again, he is actively religious, and his end point is that this body of work, the Gospel according to St. Luke and Acts, reveals the word and will of a non-human, non-corporeal, omnipotent deity. It most certainly does not. So on a fundamental level, just like with Licona, on a fundamental level, I am going to disagree with the author, and it just depends. Reading his book on the Gospel of Luke will depend entirely, how much I like it, will depend entirely on how much more he does than that. I know that Licona doesn't just preach the resurrection. He's also trying to sketch out a viable historical case for the resurrection. So he is going to be doing things in this great big book that will interest me regardless of what he himself personally believes. He himself is free to believe anything that he wants. Same thing is true with the Gospel of Luke. If you're going to do an analysis, a critical study, a reception study of the Gospel of Luke and Acts, I'd very much like it if you talk about textual traditions. I'd like it if you talk about textual variations. I'd like it if you talk about, not only the wisdom and also some of the sarcasm and the literary allusions, but also the mistakes, the errors, not just in copying, but also in conception. And you see what I see? I'm sort of getting to the point. If you enter into the book with the intention that your end goal will be to prove that this was supernaturally generated, you're going to have to leave alone parts of the text, parts of that literary and historical tradition that demonstrate beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was people that wrote this. You're going to have to either leave those out, or you're going to have to retreat to the readout of the inspiration was pure, but the execution was fallible. If he does that, we're hunky-dory. That's usually what the best scholars do, because they know that if they don't do that, they're placing an intolerable burden on me. It is intolerable to ask a reader to share your personal faith in order to read your book. That's an intolerable burden. In a free, pluralistic society, I shouldn't have to do that. And most scholars recognize that, and I don't know if Ed Gallagher does. Again, what he believes is his own business. What he has faith in is his own business, and I would love to talk to him about it. But I don't want him, curving and cutting his scholarship to fit the outline of what he believes. That is bad scholarship. So we shall see. We shall see. I'm going to give it a try. I try not to miss many commentaries on Luke unless they're just the most basic kind. But anybody who's putting any kind of literary or historical thought into it, a liturgical or theological thought into it, I probably want to read. So those two things, this huge Megillah here, the resurrection of Jesus, and the Gospel of Luke by Ed Gallagher, those are going to be my nonfiction for maybe Midrash. I'm just going to jump in. It's my own literary tradition. I suppose if I were taking full advantage of maybe Midrash is such a great event specifically because if you take full advantage of it, you will go exploring in other religious traditions. That's endlessly fascinating. I suppose I should do that, but this time around I'm just going to stick not only with my own religious tradition, but also with my own favorite religious text. And then the last, the major challenges before the last informal one is to watch a movie that deals seriously with religion. And here I'm going to stretch the point, because I'm a wavy-haired zillennial, and nobody watches movies anymore. So I'm gonna stretch the point here to also a cable production, an original serialized cable production, something that you can wait and then binge. And I'm going to go with season 2 of The Chosen by Dallas Jenkins. Season 1 I watched as it was happening, and season 2 I have not done. I specifically wanted to watch it end to end because season 1 really did build. It's a cable TV adaptation of the life of Jesus. So a lot of the stuff in there will be very familiar to you if you're familiar with the Gospels. He sort of hits the greatest hits of the Gospels and does it as an ongoing TV series. So in season 1 and I presume season 2, we are still in the early days of Jesus' ministry. One of the things I noticed about season 1 is that in addition to having a lot of terrific dramatic points on its own, it also actually had a dramatic arc. I think that Dallas Jenkins might be really talented as a director because that has to come from the director, and that actually worked. When I went back and watched season 1 from start to finish, I noticed dramatic payoffs that had nothing to do with the individual episodes. They were cumulative. And that sort of told me to wait on season 2. Wait until season 2 was done and then watch the whole thing, instead of picking at it in bits and pieces. Now, bits and pieces have come across my plate anyway, but for the video component, it's not necessarily a cinematic component. For the video component of Maybe Midrash, I'm just going to watch the whole of season 2. And I think there was a Christmas special as well. I'll watch that as well. And then the final thing, the final suggestion, not a challenge really, but the final suggestion for Maybe Midrash, again, pure Jason. He mentions that in many church services there are so-called small groups. People who will break off from the larger congregation, get together in some way, Zoom or Voxer or in person over meals or whatever, to discuss faith in their lives, to discuss the last week. Just in general terms, the challenge of the faith, the support they've taken from their faith, the beauty of it, things they've read, things they've heard, things they've learned, that sort of thing. Even sometimes, I mean, I've known of some of these small groups, and sometimes they explicitly discuss religious-related stories in the news, because they are all so comfortably attuned to loving each other that they know that recognized powder keg as a conversational topic won't explode, that they can discuss these things even though they disagree politically, because they are one in their faith. I've known some small groups like that, and I've heard people over the years, over the decades, this is all post-Vatican II, of course. In pre-Vatican II days, we had no use for small groups. What kind of treachery are you plotting? This is all after Vatican II. And I've known people over the decades who've just come out and told me, I would go completely crazy if it weren't for whatever the name is for your small group. If I didn't do that every week, I'd go completely crazy. I would feel alone in my faith. And so this is a fantastic suggestion, and Jason suggests that in Maybe Midrash, some of you maybe start small groups on Discord or Voxer or wherever. Now, this is one that fills me with the sin of envy, because I don't think anybody would want to do that with me, and yet I ironically would like to do that. So, but I don't think it'll ever happen. I don't think anybody connected with Maybe Midrash would ever want to do that with me. But it's still a great idea, and you should explore it on your own, especially if you have an active faith. You should explore it on your own, because I know for sure how valuable it can be. And Jason's call need not stop at the month of May, right? If you find a good group of people, stick with them. But anyway, that is Maybe Midrash for 2022. I'll leave a link to Jason's announcement video. Like he mentions in his video, it's the only one. There aren't any other co-hosts this year. And I would like to hear. Feel free to sound off in the comments about what you might be reading. Are you going to join in on Maybe Midrash? And if so, what's your fiction? What's your nonfiction? What's your movie? Jason leaves on his video, you'll see, he leaves a link to a long list of potential things. And he's a cinemaphile, so probably there are a lot of things on that list that might be worth your time to explore. He's almost certainly heard of more than you have, that, you might find a whole bunch of stuff there that you like. But anyway, that's Maybe Midrash. For this time around, I will finally be reading Mike Licona, so we will see what we will see. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. I've got other announcement videos to make, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.